Alex Harper had spent hours researching the mysterious message in the letter. He was an investigative journalist used to chasing stories down rabbit holes, but nothing had prepared him for this. The letter still sat on his desk, taunting him with its simple, chilling warning. They warned me about this government paranormal case. I should have listened. It didn't make sense at first. Government paranormal case? Thomas Laird? He couldn't find a single piece of solid evidence tying either to anything remotely connected to what the letter suggested. And yet, the feeling of unease refused to leave him. That night, Alex tried to shake it off. He flipped through old news articles, tried to trace leads, anything to find a clue. But the harder he searched, the more the apartment around him seemed to shift. Shadows seemed to stretch longer in the corners of the room, flickering as though they had a life of their own. The air grew colder, as if something unseen was pulling the warmth away from him. He couldn't explain it, but he knew one thing for sure: something was wrong. Sleep became impossible. Every noise, no matter how small, felt amplified. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, every distant sound outside his apartment, made his skin crawl. Even with the lights on, the apartment never felt safe anymore. It started with whispers. Faint, barely audible whispers that Alex could hear even when he was alone. They were soft at first, almost drowned out by the hum of the city beyond his window, but gradually they became clearer. His name was spoken, sometimes slowly, sometimes rushed, like they were coming from just beyond his hearing. Alex, they whispered, over and over, a haunting echo he couldn't escape. One night, unable to ignore it any longer, he stood in the middle of his living room, staring into the darkness. The walls seemed to move slightly, just enough to make him question if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The symbols were still there too, etched into the walls in jagged, unsettling shapes. He had tried wiping them off, but no matter how hard he scrubbed, they only seemed to deepen, as if they weren't meant to be erased. Fear gripped him tighter with every passing second. Alex tried to convince himself it was all in his head. Maybe the stress from work, maybe too much caffeine, anything to avoid thinking about the truth. But that night, something changed. A chill ran down his spine as he heard a door creak open down the hall. His breath caught in his throat, and his hands froze in place. "Hello?" His voice cracked as he spoke, breaking the stillness. No answer. He checked his phone. No signal. The electricity flickered briefly, plunging the room into darkness before returning. That's when he saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room. Tall, shadowy, with no distinguishable features. It moved slowly toward him, unnaturally quiet, its presence suffocating. "No," Alex whispered, backing away until his back hit the cold wall. The figure stopped mere inches from him. Its presence radiated cold, something beyond human comprehension. Alex felt paralyzed, unable to move as the whispers became louder, wrapping around his thoughts like a noose. "You knew," the figure hissed, its voice a mix of multiple voices, distorted and inhuman. "You should have listened." In that moment, Alex knew there was no escape. The warning wasn't a joke, and the letter wasn't a prank. He was caught in something much larger, something darker than he could ever have imagined. And the worst part? It wasn't over yet. Determined to get to the bottom of the strange occurrences, Alex Harper spent countless hours digging through old government files and private records. Every search led him deeper into a labyrinth of documents that hinted at something far darker than he could have imagined. The files were scattered, redacted, and half-scarred by age, but Alex pieced them together carefully, like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. What he uncovered was chilling. Paranormal entities, disturbing rituals, secretive ceremonies. The deeper Alex went, the clearer it became. There was a hidden network of experiments designed to manipulate forces beyond human comprehension. The government, once a supposed force for order and safety, had been dabbling in the unknown for years. Each page Alex read brought more questions than answers. Files spoke of entities being bound to specific locations, controlled with strange symbols and ancient rituals. There were notes detailing failed experiments where participants vanished without a trace, never to be heard from again. Entire teams of researchers had disappeared, leaving nothing but empty rooms filled with symbols scratched into the walls in desperation. The tension in Alex's chest grew with every discovery. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet felt deliberate, as though unseen eyes were tracking his every move. And then it happened. One night, as Alex flipped through a particularly disturbing file, his laptop screen suddenly flickered and went black. Frantically, he tried restarting it, but nothing worked. The air grew thick, cold, his breath visible in front of him despite the room's warmth. It was as if something unseen was pressing down on him, suffocating him with an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, a sharp, invisible force slammed into his chest, knocking him backward onto the floor. He gasped for breath, his vision blurred, unable to comprehend the sheer weight of whatever had just happened. His skin felt cold, his limbs heavy, and for a moment, he couldn't move. As he lay there, heart pounding, the whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. They filled his ears like a storm, clawing at his mind, bending his thoughts. Alex could feel the pressure of unseen hands gripping him, dragging him down into the depths of terror. "No," he managed to whisper, though his voice was barely audible over the cacophony in his head. "This isn't real," but it felt far too real. The whispers began to shift, morphing into voices that spoke in riddles, in languages Alex couldn't recognize. They taunted him, teasing him with promises of answers and revelations that were impossibly dark. Alex knew that whatever this was, it was more than just a simple haunting. It was an invasion of his mind, an attack on his very sanity. The files held more horrors than he could bear. One of the most disturbing was a heavily redacted report detailing the work of Dr. Evelyn Price, a scientist who had dedicated her career to understanding and controlling paranormal entities. Her research had led to something they never anticipated, a breach between reality and the unknown. The experiments were reckless, desperate, and ultimately catastrophic. Dr. Price's notes spoke of uncontrollable entities, dark powers she couldn't tame, and how they began to consume everything in their path. The government had tried to keep her work hidden, locking away her research in classified files. But now, Alex had stumbled upon those files, and it became clear that whatever had happened to Dr. Price hadn't been an accident. She had vanished, her work deemed too dangerous to continue. The implications haunted Alex. If Dr. Price had reached the brink of madness, and if the entities she had controlled were now free, what chance did he stand? Every sound, every shadow felt like a warning. The lines between what was real and what wasn't blurred further. Alex knew he was chasing something far beyond his grasp, a dark force that had woven its way into his very existence. And the more he uncovered, the more he realized that he wasn't just investigating a case, he was becoming part of it. The twist was undeniable. Alex wasn't just researching paranormal activity anymore. He was in the middle of it, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Alex couldn't believe what he was reading. Dr. Price's notes laid bare a horrifying truth. The government wasn't just conducting experiments. They were manipulating reality itself. Paranormal entities weren't simply entities. They were sentient beings, capable of bending time and space, twisting the world into a horrifying place where nightmares became disturbingly real. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. He couldn't process it all at once, but the deeper he dug, the clearer it became. These entities weren't bound by human logic or limits. They existed in a realm far beyond comprehension. They could alter perceptions, reshape reality, and create worlds of pure horror with ease. Alex's body began to react, as though it was trying to warn him that something was deeply wrong. His limbs twisted unnaturally, movements jerking in strange, unfamiliar ways. Shadowy figures started appearing around him. Subtle at first, just glimpses out of the corner of his eye, but growing bolder with each passing moment. They moved quickly, slithering along the edges of reality, their presence suffocating his thoughts and his very sanity. The worst part was how personal it became. His loved ones weren't safe. People close to him, his friends, his family, began to shift in ways he couldn't understand. Their faces twisted into grotesque masks of fear, their eyes hollow and devoid of life. Their voices became hollow whispers, repeating the same phrases over and over again, each one more haunting than the last. Alex could hear them calling out to him in the middle of the night. "Alex, help us! Wake up!" Their cries weren't just sounds. They were imprinted in his mind, haunting his every thought. The terror deepened when Alex found himself reliving memories, forgotten moments from his childhood, glimpses of faces that seemed to stare back at him from an eternity ago. These memories weren't his own. They were distorted, fragmented, warped by the entities, leaving him to question what was real and what was not. He had always believed that he was simply investigating a paranormal case, a job for truth and justice. But now that belief crumbled. The deeper he went, the more it became evident that he was part of the experiment, not as a mere investigator, but as a subject. His mind, his life, had been manipulated for generations, shaped and twisted for purposes unknown. The twist hit him like a bolt of lightning. He found a recording, a conversation between Dr. Price and Samuel Wright, a high-ranking government official. In the audio, Samuel's voice was calm, cold, as if he were speaking about a task rather than a human life. They discussed Alex's existence, how his mind had been crafted for this exact purpose, to serve as a vessel for the experiments, a tool for controlling the paranormal entities. "No," Alex whispered, shaking his head as tears streamed down his face. "This can't be real. It can't." But it was real. The proof was there, clear and undeniable. The worst part wasn't just the twisted reality. It was the realization that everything he thought he knew about himself had been a lie. His life wasn't his own. It was molded, shaped, controlled, and manipulated by forces beyond his understanding. Desperation clawed at him. He couldn't trust anyone, not his mind, not his body, not even his closest friends or family. The line between reality and nightmare blurred completely, leaving him in a constant state of fear, paranoia, and confusion. Alex Harper was no longer simply chasing a story. He was part of the horror, a victim in a dark experiment that had consumed his very existence. And there was no escape. There was no denying it anymore. Alex Harper was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The facility, once a sterile and ordinary place, had transformed into a hellish maze of shifting corridors and rooms that bent reality itself. Every step he took felt like plunging deeper into madness. Hallways twisted into impossible angles, and rooms collapsed into dark voids, their walls oozing with an unnatural, living energy. Trust was a dangerous luxury, and Alex quickly realized that alliances were fragile. Lily Collins, once his confidant, had her own motives. Her loyalty was wavering, driven by her own fear and ambition tied to the experiments. Detective Carter, who once seemed like an ally, had revealed his true colors, working closely with the government, pulling strings from the shadows to manipulate events in favor of their dark agenda. With every betrayal, Alex became more isolated, forced to rely only on his fragmented understanding of the truth. He was alone. The only company was the ever-encroaching darkness and the whispers that followed him, urging him to give in, to surrender to the madness. The lines between friend and foe blurred completely, leaving Alex to navigate a perilous path with nothing but fragments of information, clues that may or may not be real. The sealed chamber loomed in front of him, an oppressive space pulsating with an unnatural, almost living energy. Inside, the air was thick with dread, suffocating in its intensity. Alex could feel his breath quicken, his heart pounding as he stepped cautiously forward. And then, standing in the middle of the room, he saw him, Benjamin Cross, another investigator who had disappeared long ago. "Cross," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the relentless hum that filled the room. "You're alive?" But Benjamin Cross didn't answer. Instead, his eyes, once familiar, were hollow, vacant, as if the entity had consumed every shred of humanity within him. Before Alex could get any closer, Cross's figure began to dissolve into a wisp of black smoke. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound emerged. The darkness swallowed him whole, leaving Alex standing in the void. The only remaining trace of Cross, an echo of whispers that whispered his name, twisted into something unrecognizable. Alex reached out, grasping at the air where Cross had been, his hands trembling. Darkness pulsed around him in waves, and for a terrifying moment, he felt himself being pulled toward it, his body trying to merge with the abyss. But he resisted, clinging to the fragile thread of reality that remained. The room's walls twisted, pulsating with a malevolent energy that pressed down on him, suffocating him. He stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his vision blurring with panic. He knew, if he stayed any longer, he would become part of the darkness. The entity was closing in, seeping through every crack and crevice, transforming everything into its image. In the shadows, Alex felt the presence of something far greater than himself. It watched, waited, its hunger unrelenting. He was nothing more than a pawn, a piece in a game far beyond his comprehension. There was no turning back. The fear was unbearable, but Alex understood one thing: escape was impossible. The facility wasn't just a place, it was a living nightmare, a twisted realm where reality bent to the will of the entities. And as the darkness consumed more of the world around him, he realized that his only choice was to keep moving forward into the unknown. The darkness felt oppressive, wrapping around Alex like a shroud that refused to lift. Every sound in the facility echoed unnaturally. Each creak of the floorboards, every distant whisper, felt like they were meant to unsettle him. Trust had become a dangerous luxury, and with each ally that disappeared, Alex was left to face the nightmare alone. The environment around him warped, folding in on itself in ways that defied logic. Hallways seemed to shift, doors appeared and vanished, and the boundaries between reality and illusion blurred beyond comprehension. Alex's mind raced as paranoia set in. The once comforting faces of his friends and colleagues were now haunting apparitions, flickering in and out of existence. Ghostly whispers followed him, carrying disturbing truths he could scarcely comprehend. They spoke of betrayal, manipulation, and a truth too horrific to accept. Among these sinister figures was Dr. Marcus Hale, a man whose cold eyes seemed to peer into Alex's very soul. Hale's presence was a haunting one, his every word laced with menace. He spoke of power, not just over the entities they battled, but control over reality itself. His twisted vision involved reshaping the world into a place where fear was a tool, a totalitarian state where the entities acted at the whims of those in control. The more Alex listened, the more he realized how deep Hale's involvement in the corruption ran. But Hale wasn't alone in his ambition. Agent Blake, the ever-watchful enforcer, had allied with him. Blake's motives were equally disturbing. His goal wasn't to destroy the entities, but to bend them to the will of a totalitarian regime. Power, absolute and unchecked, was their driving force. And through false promises of escape, Blake had manipulated Alex into becoming just another pawn in their game, a subject for experimentation, a piece they could control at will. The horrifying truth sank in deeper than Alex had thought possible. Every gesture of kindness from Blake, every promise of freedom, was a well-crafted lie designed to push him closer to the edge. His fear was no longer confined to the entities that lurked in the shadows. It was compounded by the realization that the ones meant to save him were the very ones pulling the strings. Alex's heart pounded relentlessly as he tried to untangle the web of deceit. Every moment felt like walking through a nightmare. His body racked with exhaustion, his mind overwhelmed by the constant assaults on his sanity. The line between ally and enemy had been obliterated, leaving him isolated in a sea of betrayal. In the quiet moments, when the world around him seemed still, Alex could still hear the whispers, faint and ghostly, filled with sinister promises. They promised power, but it came at a cost too great to bear. And with Hale and Blake pulling the strings, Alex knew he was losing his grip on reality itself. There was no turning back, no escape from the nightmare they had created. The fear, the doubt, it consumed him. Every corner of his existence was twisted by the malevolence of those who sought to control him. And as the facility continued to break apart, piece by piece, Alex understood one thing. He was nothing more than a pawn in a game of unimaginable darkness. The air in the heart of the entity's realm was thick with an oppressive weight. Every breath felt heavier than the last, every movement a struggle against an unseen force that sought to crush them. Alex and Detective Carter moved cautiously through the maze of twisted reality, their every step a gamble against the shifting surroundings. Time was a fluid concept, stretching and compressing with little regard for logic. Shadows flickered at the edges of vision, whispering promises of power, of freedom, of escape. But they knew better. Dr. Price's final message echoed in Alex's mind, a haunting reminder of the stakes. Destroy the entity or be consumed. Yet, as they pressed forward, the boundaries between sanity and madness blurred. Reality twisted around them, shifting with malevolent intent. Shadows took on shape, becoming grotesque figures, and every flicker of light seemed to carry a warning of impending doom. As they neared the entity's core, Hale's faction surged ahead, driven by the need for control, manipulating the very fabric of existence. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow, consumed by the darkness they wielded. They moved with precision, their purpose clear, to bend the entity to their will and seize absolute power. Every corridor they passed was laced with symbols of submission, an eerie tapestry of dominance and subjugation. Blake's presence was a constant shadow, his smile twisted into something sinister. Where Hale sought to control, Blake sought influence. His game was one of manipulation, planting false memories, twisting truths, and ensuring that everyone believed their actions were their own. In this final struggle, his words were honeyed poison, convincing Alex that escape was still possible, if only they embraced the entity. Alex gripped their memories tightly, aware of the false visions Blake had injected into their mind. The entity's power ran deep, far deeper than any of them could understand, and it had seeded false victories into their consciousness. Every step forward was a step into a fabricated reality, one where freedom was an illusion and escape was a lie. The terror tightened its grip as Alex realized the entity had woven a narrative of triumph, a twisted fantasy where they believed they had outwitted the darkness. The choice was agony: merge with the entity and claim unimaginable power, or resist and face oblivion. In the heart of the entity's domain, where every corner bled into another nightmare, there was no middle ground. The whispers of power became deafening, a siren song luring them into the abyss. And yet, Alex knew the truth. The power came at a cost beyond comprehension. The final moments drew near. Hale's forces pressed on, seeking dominion. Blake's whispers grew louder, his promises of freedom and escape becoming more desperate. But beneath it all, the entity continued its silent manipulation, playing the long game with their minds. Alex's breath caught as the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, each beat a warning of the fate that awaited them. The struggle was far from over, but the final truth loomed ever closer, a truth where victory was a false memory, and escape was a fleeting dream destined to dissolve into the darkness. The destruction of the entity's physical form brought a momentary sense of triumph, but it quickly faded into something far worse. Alex and Detective Carter found themselves trapped in an endless loop, a nightmare where reality twisted and crumbled around them. No matter how far they ran, no matter how hard they fought, they were always pulled back into the same cycle of torment. Time no longer flowed in a linear way. It twisted and folded back on itself, blurring the line between past and present. Every memory was altered, reshaped by the entity's malevolent influence. In this new world, nothing was safe. Shadows whispered in the corners of every room, voices echoed without mouths, and every step forward only seemed to bring them deeper into the nightmare. The air itself felt suffocating, heavy with a presence that grew stronger with every heartbeat. Each corner they turned led to another version of the same horror, a twisted reflection of their worst fears. There was no escape, no salvation. It was as if they were being punished for daring to challenge the entity's dominance. As they moved through the fragments of reality, Alex's sense of self began to blur. Memories no longer felt like their own. Faces from their past, friends, family, appeared in fleeting glimpses, but each one dissolved into shadows before they could grasp them. The entity controlled their very essence, manipulating who they were at the most fundamental level. It stripped them of identity, leaving behind only a hollow shell filled with anguish and despair. The entity's power extended beyond mere manipulation of the physical world. It twisted emotions, turning love into obsession, friendship into betrayal, and hope into fear. The dream of freedom was a cruel illusion, a bait to lure them deeper into the trap. Every escape attempt was met with a harsher punishment, memories rewritten to make them question everything they knew. Alex's mind became a battleground, a constant war between reality and the entity's control. It was in these moments that Detective Carter began to change. His loyalty faltered, his resolve frayed, as the entity's influence crept into his thoughts. Trust became a dangerous luxury, and alliances formed in desperation shattered as quickly as they were built. Fear consumed them both, making them question their every decision, their every movement. They were no longer fighting together. They were fighting a losing battle against a force far beyond their comprehension. The final revelation came like a blow to the heart. Through moments of fragmented clarity, Alex realized the horrifying truth. Their existence had never been meant to be free. The government's experiments had crafted a vessel, a perfect host for the entity to inhabit. Alex's soul was bound to this endless cycle of torment, a prisoner condemned to an eternal nightmare where escape was a futile dream. The entity had won. It had turned their very being into a tool for its own unrelenting power. And no matter how much they fought, the nightmare would never end.